Hi everyone, welcome to the SLG Book Club Review. Today I'm going to cover Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. I think it's a fantastic read regarding vulnerability and how we can use it to really transform our lives and live lives that are more courageous and, in my opinion, more purposeful and more fulfilling. Now, granted, this book gets a lot of flack recently because I think some people look at it as unscientific or more opinion based. I've read several reviews that look at it as from that perspective. But regardless, this book spoke to me, especially at a time when I was really trying to think through my personal challenges to do with vulnerability and shame and just perception of the world and myself within that world. So I think this is a great book, not just to break the chains of uh, feeling vulnerable in a world that is so caught up with that you're not good enough or you'll never be good enough, and like shift that perspective to a more freeing state of mind. And I'll get into that in a little bit. It also talks about how to be a parent and pass that gift, I would say, of how to turn vulnerability into your strength and not a weakness onto your kids. So I think it's a great book in that context. Let me just jump right into this. So why does this book matter? Well, it talks about how to look at vulnerability as a measure of courage. So we all think of vulnerability as a weakness. It's the word vulnerable sets off alarms, red alerts. And if anything, it should be sort of like a gateway to bring about courage in your life. And I think that's really where growth sits. Anything that is worth having is going to command having courage, right? So all growth requires some level of courage. So vulnerability, yeah, you feel weak, yeah, but that doesn't mean that's where the story ends. What that means is that what do you do in response to that sensation? And it can be viewed as a measure of courage instead of that of measure of weakness. Look, it talks about how the world is pushing for the appearance of confidence that you were rock solid and you're bulletproof, and I think these are some survival. I would say these are survival mechanisms or survival psychology, but I think in today's world, I think we move forward or advance as a human race if we really embrace some of our flaws and really be comfortable, being vulnerable around those flaws. And so it's kind of like flipping the script. Instead of shoving things under the carpet, you lift the carpet, bring those things out, and at least have a very honest, sincere acknowledgement of what those flaws are. And that obviously requires you to be courageous. It's not easy to deal with the person in the mirror, and living courageously, I think, frankly, is that's the only way to live, in my opinion. Um, book also talks about handling shame and scarcity. So I'm not going to do the whole book review here. I'm just going to cover the topics that really spoke to me. So I think it talks about these two S's, shame and scarcity, as as a cornerstone of vulnerability. This book also talks about being the arena, right? When you talk about courage, what's the point in looking outside in? Being in the seats and cheering on the gladiators that are on the ground. If you want to live life to the fullest, you got to be in it, and you got to go through the highs and lows. So you got to face it. You got to face the tough um, dips in life, and you got to face what's in the mirror, and you take a and establish a baseline. I know we live in a world which nothing is good enough, but let's establish a baseline, and then move from there. Um, Also, I think this book talks about how to be a role model, and a role model really for the children. And we all know that children don't really care about what we say, what we lecture. It's all about how we live, the kind of energy that we bring about, the kind of um, real life case studies that we let our children experience in front of us. So, it's like shifting the parenting model from dad is superhuman, he's Superman, to, dad is just a human, just like you, and he can face emotional stress and confusion and insecurities just like you. But then see how dad handles it. And so you have to sort of show that not only are you human, but how humans should deal with their challenges and their vulnerabilities. So I think it's a I think the books also covers nicely how we can pay that forward to the next generation and really change the way the world looks at um, insecurities and perceived risks and vulnerabilities. The book says, courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. It's again, like I said, it's flipping the script. You don't wait for courage. You jump in. You show up first, and then the courage starts coming through. And it's like it's a bit of a chicken or the egg situation, right? That we always wait for enough courage to do something, but that courage never comes. So it's almost like you have to act, and while you're in the act, the courage is building up. And then not only that, then you're basically leaving yourself open for the world to look at you and judge you. And that requires even more courage now, right? So it just feels like your life is like falling apart. And you're just overwhelmed with so much shame and guilt and you feel like so much risk is encircling you that it kind of is overwhelming for a lot of people. But I think that's the start of growth. That's the start of the new you there. So I think that's why this book matters. It tells you to show up, and it doesn't promise you anything. It doesn't promise you that you're gonna, if you live a courageous life, you're gonna be super wealthy, super fit, and super popular. That's not what this book is about. The book is about, basically the way I look at it is living your best life. And, the best life starts with living in truth and living in courage. That's the way I look at it. So that's why this book matters. All right, let's talk about vulnerability a little bit. Okay, so vulnerability is what? Is basically uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, right? And it sits at the core of shame. Um, so we're always wondering, what can go wrong, right? Um, and what is somebody else thinking? How can somebody hurt me? If I express something to somebody, will they reciprocate? If I take a chance, will it pay off? And if it doesn't pay off, then I'm exposed to the world, and it's so embarrassing and so awkward, it's so shameful, and so on and so forth, right? So that's basically what vulnerability is. I mean, we all kind of get that, and it sits like I said, it's in the core of shame. But there's 6 myths of vulnerability that Brene Brown walks us through that we should just dispel these myths. There's no point in holding on to these myths. The first myth is the obvious one, which we covered in the previous slide, which is vulnerability is weakness. Well, it does feel like it because it feels like risk. So our survival instinct kicks in when we think that we are vulnerable. Let's say somebody's asking somebody to dance, right? So now you're vulnerable that she's going to say no, or somebody's going and is going on stage and trying to crack a joke, and the joke falls apart or falls flat. These are just small examples, right? But I've seen men who have never expressed their emotions to anybody, not their wives, not their children, and in a certain moment of, I would say, brotherhood, if you will, they've been able to at least get to the edges of those emotions and put some words together to express themselves. And even if they don't get all the way there, the fact that they get to put themselves out there is very empowering. And I've seen the change. I've seen it with myself as well. It's like you navigate your way to a point where you don't let your insecurities hold you back. You call them, you label them appropriately, and you work through them, and you face them. So no, you're still vulnerable, but by facing your vulnerabilities, embracing your vulnerabilities, you've basically taken their power away from you. If anything, it's put you on the other side of the wall where you're living somewhat weightless, somewhat stressless. Um, so I think that's to think of vulnerability as a weakness. Yeah, you can start with that. That's a natural instinct. But I think you got to evolve past that, right? So vulnerability is generally a strength because it allows you to dig deeper into something that you need to work on and get past. That's where growth is. So vulnerability is more of a, like I said, it's an indicator that this needs work, this needs courage. Focus on it, move past, move above and beyond. Um, the second myth is, I don't do vulnerability. I just gotta shut myself down. I can't do vulnerability. I see dads do this all the time. Um, Try to appear as Superman to their kids. Again, that's not something that I advocate. I think we all are vulnerable because we're all human, and if we're not allowed to be vulnerable, that's partly our fault because we have not cultivated an ecosystem, a tribe, a group, whatever you want to call it, a social network that allows us to be vulnerable. And that's part of your exploration as a human being is to explore the vulnerability, is to explore what ticks you, where do you think the risks are, mental, emotional risks are, because there's always a story behind that trigger. So you can't just say I don't do vulnerable. Everybody's vulnerable, so accept it. Um, there's other myth is vulnerability is letting it all hang out. No, it doesn't. Uh, Nobody needs to know everything about you. Nobody, frankly, cares. Um, so it doesn't mean overexposure, right? So if you're feeling vulnerable and you're sharing something with somebody, doesn't mean that you have to tell them your entire life story from start to finish with the nth level of detail. Nobody cares to that level. Um, you know, so vulnerability does not require extreme disclosure. Okay. Um, then the other thing is, I can go it alone. No, you can't. You're a human being. We all are. And just to say like I don't need anybody, the world, I don't need them, they don't need me. That's a cop out, in my opinion. I think you can tell yourself any story you want, but at the end of the day, I think we're better off when we share and we learn and grow. It's kind of in line with our SLG motto, the share, learn, and grow community that we have, and that's part of your growth. So you can't just be an isolationist. The fifth myth: you can engineer the uncertainty out of vulnerability. No, you cannot. You're not God. End of story. Okay, you can't take out risk. You can't take risk out of life. Um, Life is what it is. Um, we don't control much of it. We are always exposed to risk. So no, you can't engineer uncertainty out of vulnerability. You're a human being. What more can I say there? Then the last one is trust comes before vulnerability. That's a big no-no. You can't say that unless and until I fully trust somebody or a situation, only then I can be vulnerable. If you're going to be in that situation will never play out. That's a total theoretical construct. You will never have 100% trust of any situation of any person. So don't wait for trust to be at 100%. It'll never be there. So to look for perfect conditions to be vulnerable, I think that's not very sensible. Um, yeah, vulnerability is basically not good or bad. It's neutral. But allowing yourself to be vulnerable, that's true strength, because what you allow is this exploration into the side of you that may need some work, that may expose you to more elements, that may expose you to new growth, that may expose you to more stress. So when you expose yourself to new possibilities, that's where strength is, good or bad, right? So vulnerability in itself is neutral. What you do with it or how you use it to your advantage, that's the real end game. So being okay with risk, being okay with being embarrassed, being okay with being judged, being okay with being, kind of talk behind your back. If you're okay with that, you're going to go a long way. You're going to go a long way. So let me get into the sort of the two facets of vulnerability, right? Which is shame and scarcity. These two S's, right? So shame is what? I'm bad. I'm a mess. I'm flawed. Um, well, yeah, that's. I think a lot of us go through that emotion, and shame it's a this negativity can be devastating for some people. It's like a cancer. It just kind of erodes you from inside. In the book it talks about failure is temporary, giving up is what makes it permanent. So shame is what makes you give up, right? So, if you're not even in the arena, if you're not even trying, you're giving yourself a 100% chance of not succeeding. And if you're too ashamed to do something, you're giving yourself a 100% chance of not doing something. Um, and we all been there, right? What nurtures shame? When we are when it's secret, hush hush, when we are completely silenced about it, about a certain topic, or when we are bathing in judgment of others, including ourselves, by the way. So secrecy, silence, and judgment, these are sort of the ingredients to grow shame. And we live in shame all our lives. Like I know people who've said, look, my family comes from a relatively poor socioeconomic background, and I'm kind of ashamed of that. So I don't show it, because the way I dress, I try to kind of play up my socioeconomic class. Why? Because of judgment. You know, there is hush hush. There's a lot of silence around things, and it just develops into a complex. It just is unnecessary burden that you're carrying all your life. And the way you deal with it is you develop yourself a social network, an authentic network where you can dare to share, right? Otherwise, if you're just holding it all in, it's not going to work. I mean, there are people who've been abused as children, and they've not had the courage to share that with anybody, because what would the world say? But I think you've got to stop living under the weight of shame and the weight of judgment, and understand that this is not, that's not your fault. We all humans are damaged one way or the other, but we damage ourselves more when we carry the damage, mask the damage, cover it up, and then say we're not damaged, right? So you got to take shame out at its knees. Um, Brene Brown says shame derives its power from being unspeakable. So speak, call it out, label what bothers you, label what shames you. Scarcity. Let's get into that. The scarcity culture, right? You're too afraid to be enough, right? Never enough, never good enough, never perfect enough, never thin enough, never powerful enough, never successful enough, never smart enough, never certain enough, never safe enough, never extraordinary enough, never, rich enough, never funny enough, tall enough, fair enough, all of these things, right? Never enough. So what we are constantly chasing is trying to be enough. And there are three sources of scarcity, right? It's the shame side of it. Then there's the comparison, like what we see on IG or other social media with others, like, well, I don't have this. Obviously, I'm not good enough. If I was good enough, I would have what this person has. And then also something that leads to sort of this mindset is this disengagement. And I think it's very, very, very um, devastating, actually, because when you just give up, when you just totally give up, let's say on a relationship, for instance, it's just not good enough, or I don't see it, like it's there's just too much mess in here. I just and you just completely you know um, evacuate the premises, if you will, and you're totally disengaged from something that could have been developed and nurtured. That would lead to a more scarce mindset. And you kind of turn some things into self-fulfilling prophecy that way. So that's something else to think about. That, stop saying this. You are good enough, and especially you're good enough as of now. This is what you have. Now, where do you want to go? That's a different discussion. But as of now, you're good enough. Set a baseline. And I think that's why it's important to just call it like it is, because these are very toxic thoughts, and they can play havoc on person as a single person or a person in a relationship. That's why we get bored from relationships, and we just exit certain relationships without realizing the damage that we're doing. Um, yeah, and like I always say, life is abundant, but you decide if it's abundant or not. Because you can have everything in the world and still nothing is good enough, right? But once you decide that I've got everything I need right now, and whatever needs to happen in the future, whatever you want in the future, you can work towards it. But that doesn't mean that you're not good enough. That this is just part of your growth. That's just part of your process. So stop putting yourself in this um, very toxic comparative state that nothing is enough. It is enough. You decide if it's enough or not. Oh yeah, and also the book talks about parenting. I'm just going to quickly go through this. Look, most childhood trauma comes from shame, and we tell our kids that you're not smart, um, or you're not good looking enough, or I've seen parents say that, or in athletics, you're not fast enough, or you're not strong enough, and you're not nimble enough. Now, I understand there's a whole thought process behind tough love, but frankly, I think as parents, we need to create our families, and I like it what it says in the book as shame-free zones. Like, and these shame-free zones are not just about not letting shame come into it, but it's also showing your children how to deal with shame. So make sure that dad doesn't come across as Superman. Dad says, look, these are my challenges, these are my problems, and this is how I deal with them. I feel sad, I feel frustrated, but then, I call it like it is, and then I set a baseline, and then I work towards improving my situation without fear of judgment. Because for me, the priority is living my best, most courageous life. My priority is not worrying about what somebody's going to say to me or about me tomorrow. And I think you start relating with your children far better when you live in this honest, courageous space, which is not theoretical at all, because it's not about lecturing your kids about values. You're telling them this is a reality. I know one mother was telling me that her daughter is very concerned about her body image. She's in her late teens, and she looks at what's out there in social media, and she's used the word. It was very unfortunate, but she shared with me. She's like, my daughter told me that I'm like hideous looking compared to these women, and and I think the way this mother handled the situation was quite well. She basically sat down, she looked at some photos. She's like, "Oh yeah, based on this, you think that you've got something in your mind that tells you that you're not attractive." And she showed her photos when she was a kid, and she had freckles, and she was going through that whole sort of growth spurt, and they were having this discussion, very open and honest discussion, and they laughed a little. The daughter felt like she could relate to the mother, and they kind of talked about how the world puts very unrealistic expectations on all of us, and twists our realities and expectations, and we're no longer living in reality. We're living in expectations. And she had a very open dialogue. She shared her insecurities as well. And through this discussion, it turned out that that the daughter was actually kind of parenting the parent a little bit. She's like, "Well, you shouldn't feel bad about it because you're beautiful and this," and the mom was saying the same thing. So she was telling me that within a matter of half an hour, the tables had turned, and but it only happened because you allowed your daughter to be vulnerable. She allowed her daughter to be vulnerable, and then she allowed herself to be vulnerable, and they kind of went on this little 30-minute journey, um, and they reached a point where they were supporting each other, and they were really filtering through a lot of noise and BS that the world puts in front of us. So I think she did a fantastic job. She's being a role model, because frankly, kids don't listen to lectures. They follow or they emulate a certain role that we put forward. And I think when you express vulnerability, when you relate to your kids, I think in the book it says, which I agree with, vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. I think once you get there, you allow that very difficult place, that vulnerable place, to just open up to this beautiful place where the bonds are stronger, the connections are deeper, and I think, yeah, I think it's wonderful if done right. All right, look, in the end, what are the takeaways? First of all, you are enough. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about as of now. Uh, Life is all about evolution, improving yourself. So as of now, everything you have, be grateful for it, be thankful for it, and build yourself into a better version of yourself. So that's just part of life. But don't get caught up with that. You're not fill in the blanks enough. Throw this out. This mindset's got to go. This is one of the biggest barriers. Number two, vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. If done right, vulnerability opens doors to better understanding, more empathy, better connections with yourself, more self-awareness, better connection with others, and allows you to kind of get past these unspeakable, you know, um, get over. The vulnerability is a bridge that will allow you to get over the bridge of shame. The river of shame, and the river of guilt, and the river of scarcity. Vulnerability is the bridge that allows you to pass it. And remember, shame feeds on your fears. So we all feel shame from time to time. That's not the point. The point is you're going to allow this dragon to balloon, to grow up. You feed it with more fears and insecurities, it's only going to get bigger, and to the point that it can really detach you from reality. Um, as parents, you got to create a shame-free zone in your family. That it starts at home. It starts at home. Show them how to deal with shame and guilt and insecurities and vulnerabilities, um, and show them that you're human and that you can understand their situation. You were young at their age one time. You lead. It allows you to lead. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It allows you to lead and connect with the people that matter most. In the end, vulnerability is not about winning or losing. Like I said, vulnerability is really neutral, right? It's not good or bad. It's not about winning or losing, but it allows you to um, live with courage and freedom, right? It allows you to live light, I would say. And Brene Brown, said it really well. I would quote her in the end. Vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. It's very important. Sounds like truth and feels like courage. So, vulnerability is associated with truth and courage. And truth and courage aren't always comfortable. Yep, we all know that. They're never comfortable, actually, but they're never weakness. So who would say that truth is a weakness, or telling the truth is a weakness? If anything, it takes a lot of courage. And who would say that courage is a weakness? Courage is courage. Courage is this ability to face fear and still go and do what needs to be done. Courage is not fearlessness. Um, it's a matter of dealing with your values, what you want out of life, despite what stands in your way. And isn't that a beautiful way to live your life? That you speak the truth, you live in the truth, and you live with courage, and let the chips fall where they may. Uh, you know, if you dare to live, in a vulnerable way, it doesn't mean that you're going to have everything in the world. Um, but it sure as heck beats living in fear and in bubbling in insecurities and just constantly feeling small. I mean, life is abundant, but you only get one shot at it. So make it count. Um, I wish you guys that you all dare to live uh, uh, through your vulnerabilities. You know, face them, embrace them, and get this book, take a read. There's a bunch of information on YouTube as well. I think it's a fantastic read. I think it's going to connect with quite a few people. So yeah, with that, thank you very much for watching. We'll be back with another review next month. Take care.